In this video, we're going to talk about the CATEX, or Catastrophic Exercise Series, going on for the next several years, 2013, 14, 15, and 16. CATEX had its origin in July of 2012 when we had government, and it was the states and UASIs of New York, the urban areas of New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, and Washington came together at this meeting in Newark, Delaware, and they invited members from the private sector to join them. Specifically, there were members from the electric sector, gas and oil, food, and telecom. They came together into this integrated planning meeting to discuss several things. The states had been working on the RCPGP grant, Regional Catastrophic Planning Grant, and they were looking for a way to sustain that. The private sector was asked to join this meeting to talk about how they could sustain pieces of these projects that had direct operational benefit in the private sector, which they had learned since 2011 through integrated planning meetings. So it was during this meeting some very candid discussions occurred, and basically one of the takeaways was, hey, we're in this boat together. That if things don't go well for the private sector and government during a storm, both are brought under the spotlight. Government has the responsibility to provide accurate information to their leadership, and private sector has a responsibility to restore their customers and communicate. And so it's a very complex environment, but they agreed they needed to work together. So what they decided to do at that meeting, number one, was they wanted to form an annual exercise series, and that was CATEX. And the purpose of that would be power restoration. That was the common thread that both government and private sector were all dealing with. So what they needed then to set up was a planning framework. So they established a regional integrated planning framework that basically set up two working groups, one for government and one for the private sector. So the private sector mobilized under the Multi-State Fleet Response Working Group. The government had already been working together, and they called themselves the East Coast Corridor Coalition. That was started by the UASIs of New York and D.C., with New Jersey and Philadelphia, and then the states were added onto that, and of course they'll integrate FEMA and some of the other agencies. So they needed a framework, so they set up a shared governance framework. So on the steering committee for the Fleet Working Group, there are government members. On the steering committee for the East Coast Corridor Coalition Working Group, you'll have, you don't now, but you will have a few private sector folks there as well. And they will work together on common issues that they both face. So power restoration was the big one. Gas and oil supply is another big one. Cyber is another big one. They'll add those on in out years. So that was the second thing they looked at, a framework. The third thing they agreed they needed was they needed a better way to share data. So they began looking at ways they could pass information from government to private and private to government. So under the Fleet website, the Fleet Working Group has a website. There is government data aggregated for them from around the country to help fleet movement. Like all the toll systems are centralized there. All the fleet requirements and way stations and things are put into that website as well. So, and there's a pilot project going on in Virginia where government is actually giving credentials to private sector for them to access government databases to see information so they can plan and coordinate better. And then the last thing they wanted to do was they wanted to develop operational solutions. So while they went through this planning and exercise process, problems that were operational were developed. What they didn't want to do is just write it on a piece of paper and put it in a file. They wanted to develop solutions together to solve this. For example, they're working on a regional fleet movement coordination call where the private sector electric companies will convene a call and invite government in, the emergency management, transportation folks, to listen. Hey, with Hurricane Sandy coming, we're going to move 1,100 trucks into this area. into this region, and we want you to know the numbers of people, trucks, the departure times, and the routes they're going to take. then government has intel they haven't seen before at the regional level, then they can help private sector use the appropriate routes and so forth. So those are operational solutions. There's a parking lot of issues being developed now. So back to the original point here, CATEX is the culmination of this planning framework, sharing of data, solutions, and CATEX is going to draw out every year. 2013 they'll be in DC, 14 will be in Philadelphia, 15 is planned for New Jersey, 2016 is in New York, and they'll keep coming back over and over again to exercise this, to expedite fleet movement, which then will affect the supply chain for gas and oil, food, telecom, water, and all the other things. So that's what CATEX is and how it came about.